The Imperium delegation had arrived, just as Roboute said they would in time. A ship larger than anything she had ever seen, followed by thousands of lessers tearing their way through the warp to arrive on Baston. She had quickly returned from Griffon when she had been told, traveling on the Eldar ship, to get back as quickly as possible. Even with the apparent superior speed of the webway, they had barely made it back in time. The delegation from Griffon hastily assembled from the highest ranking present at their capital world. The massive ship, using technologies her studies had only told her of in abstract, descended to the world without tearing its plates asunder and lowered a grand bridge wide enough for the largest procession she had ever seen before. Masterworks of the ages past used to the sole purpose of grander presentation, a statement like little else. And at the front of the procession was the man brother told her was their father. Taller than even Roboute was, clad in a metal that shone like gold, but her eyes told her absolutely wasn't. She was elated to discover that her father had no points of weakness, not one on his body. His power armor had several, all the points that had to be relatively weak to allow it to flex over a humanoid frame, and his weapons had their own, again, the weaknesses that were inherent to allow such a shape to exist, but her father himself had none. The weaknesses she did see on his armor and weapons were temporary at best, shifting into and out of existence and sometimes disappearing entirely. It was that shifting that told her father was a techno-psyker, as she was. She had seen similar in her own equipment as she focused her will upon strengthening them. It was all she could do to not exclaim in excitement, and she absolutely could not do that because she was the eldest sister. She had to set an example. She would have time to speak to him later. She could contain herself for now. She wouldn't judge him for his outrageous flirtations with the Everqueen either. Everqueen started it, and therefore she was to blame, and Petra could let her know this at a later time. For the time being, she held the task of greeting and entertaining her sisters, the ones that brother did not bother to get. Currently enjoying the sweet chilled fruit and sitting in the shade next to a sparring ring constructed within the limits of the central fortress, Petra determined that her sisters were mostly what the tech priests of Griffon would call meatheads, a slightly insulting term used to refer to low-ranking members of the faith, usually the newly recruited batches of Skitarii, who tended to focus much of their efforts on the pursuit of combat efficacy and tactical understanding over the more theoretical understandings pursued by older tech priests. It was usually only once they were promoted to officer positions that Skitarii apprentices began to dedicate their free periods to proper Magos studies, coinciding with greater degrees of cybernetic implantation, and thus less meat in the head. This was explained to her last time she was permitted to attend a regular debate period among the archmagi of Griffon, and that particular insult was levied in seething binaric. She found the term rather useful now, watching two of her stranger sisters sparring enthusiastically with Cassandra. Our sister is quite the formidable opponent. One of her new sisters, Fulgrim, mused as she bit into her slice of chilled fruit. Petra liked Fulgrim. She had a strong name and wasn't rude. 7 weak points. I can't match Hathor or Lofen, let alone both at once. Cassandra is incredible. Morrigan snorted in amusement, looming over the rest of them in a most disagreeable manner as she used a fork to sample the fruit platter. 6 weak points. Cassandra cheats. Petra, Aurelia, and myself working together couldn't beat her. Only the oldest Stormcloaks can keep up, and only Roboute can beat her. Oh? The other sister present with them, a firm-eyed woman who was also unreasonably tall named Athena, spoke up, looking away from the inner workings of Miden. Athena had asked to see the inner workings of her servo skulls, and Petra deigned to let her. The sum of the review thus far had been the occasional hum as parts were gently examined. They weren't her best work, but she had occasionally tried to improve the models every now and then, as a side project. Nothing serious. And how does Cassandra cheat? Athena continued, face stone blank, but voice carrying the note of curiosity. 6 weak points. Petra decided to answer, in case Morrigan misrepresented their sister in front of their newly met siblings. Each of us have a psychoactive specialty. My talent lies in technology. Morrigan's lies in resiliency. She would keep the truth of her eyes hidden, where it could do little harm. Nodding forwards, she finished just as Cassandra avoided an attack she could not have seen coming and pivoted into a perfectly timed counter against both her opponents. Cassandra's lies in divination psychery. Athena hummed in consideration as Fulgrim made an impressed sound. "Ah, I can see how that would give quite the advantage in dueling. You said that brother Robut can still defeat her? What is his specialty then?" Whining. Petra replied boastfully. "Brother is the best at planning among any of us." "Planning? How does one outplan an opponent that can see what you intend to do before you do it?" Fulgrim replied in curiosity. Athena stared at the fight with furrowed brows, seeming to consider the topic deeply. Morrigan shook her head. "Brother likes to harp on about logistics as the be-all, end-all of conflict. The person who prepared more wins the fight, or something like that. He applies this to himself too. There's a method to fighting opponents with precognition that the Eldar talk about sometimes, involving a certain mindset and fast reactions. As it turned out, Brother has had to fight many enemies with precognition and has gotten good at countering their vision. Cassandra complains about it often." Petra finished for Morrigan. "Sometimes he changes his actions in an instant, just enough for Cassandra's guard to be useless. Sometimes the vision of the action is intentionally misleading, and she doesn't realize until it's too late for best effect. Sometimes it's simply a matter of Cassandra not having the reach or weight to break his guard." "Ah, so it's a skill then." Fulgrim nodded. She was about to speak again before being interrupted. "Each of us have a psychoactive specialties, you said." Athena declared suddenly, brown eyes focused. "What is ours?" Petra blinked, then felt terribly uneasy. "I do not know. Brother is the one who told me, and I did not ask about any of you." The admittance was a failure on her part. She should know more than she did. If it was worth doing, it is worth doing to completion. She had not asked about the nature of her sisters, an incomplete task. "I will ask next I see him." "No need," Athena replied. "I shall ask father instead." She placed the final cap back onto the reassembled servo skull and handed it back to Petra. 3 weak points. The work is high quality, higher than any I have seen from the design thus far. The words were blunt and stoic, an observation of fact. It sounded much like the deadened expressiveness of the tech priests who shunned outward displays of temperament. She was quite gladdened to hear them. Ladylike, she nodded gracefully and took Maiden back from the hands of Athena, gently willing it back to wakefulness with her will. Tech psychery was difficult, much more difficult than anything else she had done before, primarily because it was new and completely unexplored. The tech priest did not have psychers used for this manner, only astropathic servitor relays and similar. The Eldar did not have psychers trained in this art, being highly focused on the warp and related immaterial things. None of her sisters had a talent for this art. Brother did not have any first-hand experience in this art. It was all hers. It was all hers. The tech priests were quick to heap praises on her for developments in the skill, in addition to her reconstruction of their damaged STCs. Brother was quick to smile and offer a hug. And now she knew that father had the same talent. He was like her. The thought was quite exciting. Maiden came to life in her hands, quickly orienting itself and going through the startup process. Out of habit, she mentally recited the hymns of activation as her mind re-established the connection between it and her internal mind-machine interface cogitator. She gotten it for redundancy's sake, to ensure she had both the option of untested tech psychery and the conventional implants known to Griffon. They were quick to teach her whatever she requested, in hopes that she would continue her work with their STCs. She eventually had to mostly stick to her private chambers, with how much they attempted to offer her and all the praises she got simply by walking outside. It was embarrassing, it was flattering, she wanted more of it, but only so much at a time. Maiden font of endless benedictions, blessed by Deus Mechanicus, Universal Genius, and many other titles. She was emboldened by the praises, but had yet to earn most of them. She hadn't done that much so far. All she was doing was finishing other people's work and fixing up existing designs. Well, that wasn't quite true. She got to produce her own machine implants, arms and armor, but that was most tech priests, not just her. Hardly unique. They had told her she was more than welcome to make a brand new pattern, that she had more than proven herself capable, a living conduit to the God machine. Anything she could wish. The choices overwhelmed her. She didn't know what she wanted to make yet. She did know that she wanted it to be a gift to her brother, to aid in his duties establishing Albion. But it had to be perfect. It would be her first fully custom pattern. You only get one first. Petra. The voice of Cassandra called out to her, snapping her from her thoughts. Carefully, not jolting, she raised her eyes and saw her sisters staring at her. Heat came to her face as she realized she drifted off. 7 weak points on Cassandra. They shifted and warped as she looked at them. Raising a brow, she responded, "Yes? I asked if you wanted a turn in the ring. You haven't gone yet." Hathor, who was as tall as Morrigan was, and thus also being quite selfish in her domination of the airspace, asked again in an amused fashion. She was breathing heavily, tunic stained in sweat and sparring sand, and bruises rapidly fading under her gaze. 6 weak points. She frowned and pressed her lips thin. "I do not focus my studies on unarmed combat. I would not perform well. To fight without her arms and armor would be to be foolish enough to go without both. Unarmed combat will only ever be a last resort measure, melee combat a second to last resort, and ranged combat to be defaulted to first and foremost." "What, you're scared?" "Come on, it's all in good fun." Loffen, with a fanged grin and covered in bruises from the numerous elbows she had taken to the face, mocked her. 7 weak points. No good to have a sister who can't tussle with the rest of us. A good brawl gets the blood pumping, you know. Her hands curled into fists. "I'm well aware of the effects of exercise," she ground out. "My focus is on actual warfare, the kind that uses weapons, the kind that's actually effective at killing one's enemies. Not suitable for spars." The low-quality sister was about to speak again, only to be cut off when Hathor smacked the back of her head. "Gah." She said she doesn't want to brawl Loffen. Don't tease her about it. Low-quality rubbed the back of her head and gave a sour look at Hathor before waving a hand and grumbling a reply. "I wasn't insulin her kith and kin or nothing. Just want to get to know our little sister is all. I am the oldest." Petra declared, stone-faced and staring straight at low-quality with a smouldering expression and thoughts of putting more weak points on her. "I reached full maturity a few years ago." Low-quality stared at her for a moment, giving a long, evaluating look up and down. "Sad to be done growing, and so little." The statement was mild and observational. She hated it. Petra decided she wanted nothing to do with this conversation any longer, standing up and marching away. She ignored the calls of her siblings behind her and locked in step with the tech guards Griffon had assigned to defend her. She was going to go join the diplomatic exchanges of Griffon and Mars. That was something she was interested in. Hathor felt an acute sense of frustration as she watched one of her sisters stomp away in seething, mechanical steps. She decided to resolve that frustration by turning a flat expression towards Loffner, master of not knowing when to stop talking. To her small credit, Loffen looked somewhat guilty at what she just said, hand raised to call out, but fingers curled in hesitation. Hathor had arrived here planning on doing her best to make sure this exchange went well, but it seemed like she was quite useless at that task, as all it took was 3 idle comments in Loffen's standard, careless manner to make that a failure. Morrigan, one of her newly met sisters, was joining Fulgrim and her in giving a reproachful look. Athena, and strangely enough Cassandra, looked unconcerned, although Hathor suspected that was for entirely different reasons. I didn't know she was that sore about being short." Loffen defended herself. Opening her mouth to speak again, Hathor interrupted her. "I asked you to quit teasing her, and you kept doing it." "Why?" Loffen threw her hands up. "It wasn't teasing. I was making an observation. How was I supposed to know she had such thin skin?" "By using your wits, perhaps," Morrigan commented in a venomous manner. She was about to speak again herself, but was interrupted by Cassandra speaking up, a rarity from what Hathor had observed. "Did you mean to upset her?" Eyes boring into Loffen, who answered with slight annoyance. "Of course not. That's mild stuff right there." "Eye on," Cassandra interrupted her. "Then apologize next time you see her." Loffen shut her mouth and huffed through her nose, looking frustrated with the face that she had caused frustration. After a moment she replied, "You seem pretty unconcerned about this." A statement to shift the topic away, Hathor resumed her glare, and Loffen shied away from the look. Cassandra's voice was calm as she replied, "If Petra was good at holding grudges, she wouldn't be able to tolerate Morrigan." At this, Morrigan flinched harshly, but did not refute the statement. Cassandra continued, "Just apologize for causing offense. Don't attempt to excuse what you did, and ask for forgiveness. Petra will grumble about it, but forgive you. She's an egg." "An egg?" Hathor asked. Fulgrim chimed in with an upbeat tone before Cassandra attempted to explain. Instead, Cassandra shifted a glare to Athena for some reason. "Hard but fragile shell, gooey on the inside, right? It's pathetic," Athena declared with an unimpressed look. Nothing Loffen said was untrue. She took offense from the most minor barbs. Her technical expertise is impressive, but her emotional stability is that of a child. The fault lies with her. This brought the glares of the assembled sisters, to which Athena looked distinctly unaffected by. Hathor let out a long, low groan of frustration as things continued their slow collapse around her. She was quite useless at this diplomacy thing, it seemed. There had been silence the moment she entered the debate hall, a great hush that suddenly descended on a great many voices previously loudly calling out in binaric. She could not yet understand the language, having put off getting the implants required for such for a later date. She wasn't sure when, yet. Pausing after a few steps in, she cast a look about the chamber and the assembled tech priests, quickly doing an estimate of total numbers. Less than 1,000, more than 500 by her immediate judgment. She had been intending on simply finding a seat, the tech guard outside the chamber not stopping her as she approached, but now all optics were upon her. She was uncertain of what to say in the immediate sense, and resolved to frown her way through this conversation as well. On one side of the debate hall were a large number of Griffon tech priests, mostly humanoid in frame, with the occasional taurin or winged body structure and a large array of mechadendrites unleashed from white robes. Many parts were mass-produced, and remnants from their time as tech guards. On the other side of the debate hall were a large number of what she assumed were Martian tech priests, with frames that varied from perfectly humanoid under skin-tight weave to completely inhuman, disguised under warframes that hummed with power. The variance was completely inconsistent, and each part she examined was entirely unique in construction. This indicated something about the respective cultures, but such was always Aurelia's specialty. She had little idea what that could mean. Carl was there on the Griffon side. She sent a greeting over her internal vox, which was returned. At the very end of the debate hall, towering over his fellows even while sitting and hunched over, was a giant humanoid frame with 12 arms and a single central optic. Little else could be discerned from beneath the robes and constantly moving servants about the form. The topmost set of arms were the largest, proportional to the frame, while the other sets were smaller and close to the torso. Many weak points, but few of which would meaningfully affect the performance of the primary frame. The great figure inclined its optic, and a deep, masculine and synthetic voice issued out from it in accented high Terran. "Ah, child of the Omnissiah, you have arrived." The optic tilted in the rather human-like gesture of curiosity before continuing. "I presume to observe the exchange." She let her frown deepen before nodding sharply. There was silence in the chamber. The optic straightened itself before nodding slowly. "We had just reached a scheduled break in the talks, unfortunately. As you are here, however, we of the Martian delegation would wish to ask something of you." She grew suspicious, letting her brows furrow deeply in a suspicious glare before tilting her head in questioning. The giant frame replied in answering, "For the sake of our own official records, a small test of your gift with technology." "What is the test?" she grumbled out, not outright rejecting the proposal. Reboot had impressed on her the importance of verifying information as she was growing up. She understood the desire to have your own accurate records of something. Besides, she liked to tinker anyways. This would likely be relaxing. A servitor walked forwards, bringing with it a large, unfolding desk. 2 more servitors came forward, bringing a great deal of writing utensils and a thin, recent print booklet. She walked to it, looking down at the pamphlet before her. Flipping through it, she found it to be another incomplete STC printout, this being of a basic adjustable cybernetic limb frame with a hollow interior. It was missing much of the design that would allow it to actually function. As we understand it, you have been aiding the Griffon branch in completing the patterns of their STC fragments to usable states. Before you is an incomplete basic Martian cyberlimb. We have 120 complete variants of the design on records. We wish to see how your talents compare to our existing records. Innovation or not, then, she grunted out, cutting through the subtext without real care. If they tried to attack her, she'd attack them back. They'd deserve it. Worry not. You are the child of the Omnisire, and learned in the mysteries of the Mechanicum. In Electra's own words, innovation is the dominion of those who came before, and those that will come long after we must endure the present. The Omnisire is a font of wonders, and his children are likely to be the same. From the slight shifting in tendrils, she saw that opinion was not universally shared by those present. Merely complete the pattern in as many manners as you can. We plan to resume talks in 1 Terran hour, should you like to consider that a time limit. She grunted before sitting down before the floor desk and reaching for a quill. She paused as she noticed none before yet another servitor approached the desk. Delicately, it offered her what looked to be a mechanical stylus, which she took in one hand. It is somewhat extravagant to use a pen. A quill will last much longer. I do not mind parting with a minor relic for this, however. The giant frame called out, tone similar to the old Eldar scholar Rastilin. There is an internal reservoir of ink. Do not worry about dipping it as you write. Exhaling, memorizing the design of the pen in her hands, she took a few more moments to memorize the STC printout of the incomplete arm completely. Then testing the pen for a moment and finding that it drew out exactly as much ink as she needed to make a fine line, she began to record the first completion to the incomplete design that she thought of. 5 minutes later, she set the first set of completed diagrams, its intended function, the list of its expected tolerances, and required materials aside, moving on to the next idea she had while working on the first. Eventually, speaking started up again around her, but she was too busy writing the next idea down to bother listening. She was in a meditative state now, ideas coming to her mind, completing and being memorized, then being recorded as her mind went to the next idea in line. 1 hour later, she had gone through several small stacks of parchment in creating completed variants of the arm. 12 variants in all, much to her displeasure. She didn't have enough time to write down the rest. She grunted unhappily, leaning back and staring at her work. "Are you complete, child of the Omnisire?" the giant frame called out. She grumbled. "It's been an hour. Out of time. Please continue for as long as you need. More supplies will be provided as you require them." She looked up, evaluating the looks of the giant frame, then sending a disgruntled look out around at the mostly quiet tech priests. Thousands of optics from almost 1,000 individuals looking at her work, mostly silent save the occasional rustle of robes or cloth. They looked impressed. She grunted again and went back to work on the diagrams. ULLN Russ, Primarch of the 6th Legion. It wasn't really hard following the scent of her new sister, a curious blend of machine lubricant, incense and fruits. The trail led out of the primary training grounds, down through the main keep, out across a central courtyard, and into a fortified section that bore banners of eagle lions and cogs. The sounds of distant cogitators screaming and increased scent of machine lubricants told her that this was probably the local machine priest temple. All that technical stuff didn't hold much of her attention. Lots of numbers and fiddly stuff that she didn't really have the patience for. She knew her sisters and the machine priests probably knew what they were talking about and left them to it most of the time. It was a common superstition on Fenris that writing too much would steal the knowledge out of your head. She knew that the idea was complete shit, of course, but that didn't exactly lend her much enthusiasm for the scholarly subjects. Maybe if she had landed somewhere else, but that was musing on her part. She wasn't one for scholarly quibbling. She liked to learn about things in a hands-on manner. The fastest way to learn about someone, in her experience, was to get into a good tussle first. Hathor was stubborn without realizing it, going for decisive shots that would end a fight immediately whenever she could, and moving a brawl in that direction any other time. Athena was prone to trading blows over abandoning an attack, relying on her strength to tough through a hit in exchange for getting one in on her foe. Fulgrim was a perfectionist to her core, always choosing the most correct option in whatever situation she found herself in, unaware that it made her incredibly predictable to go up against. Danu was prone to defense above anything else. Madonna was downright awful in a brawl and just punched over and over, and little Atalanta was shaping up to be an unpredictable terror once she was done growing. A preference to wear down the opponent first, bad at dealing with new situations, and downright born for combat. Now, having fought 2 more sisters, Lofn could get a good read on them in the best way she knew how. Morrigan never bothered to defend herself, relying entirely on her reach and pain tolerance to take blows others would try their best to avoid and dish out blows in turn. Cassandra was a terror in the exact opposite way that Atalanta was, in that she always knew exactly what you were going to do, often before you did. Morrigan was used to lots of pain and knew that she could take it if it meant winning. Cassandra had been in ambient danger long enough to master predicting and avoiding it. Neither meant very good situations growing up. According to their own stories, abbreviated as they were, their other brother came by to pick them up pretty early. Lofn knew she owed him a thank you and a drink now. So she wanted to tussle with their last sister, and might have pushed a bit, and that got the girl upset. Lofn wasn't really sure why she got so testy, but she'd prefer to not have a sister hate her over something small like this, so she was planning on apologizing and asking to start over. The whole polite rigmarole. What kind of growing up would make one sensitive to noting how small they were? Being around giants, maybe? Lofn really couldn't wrap her head around it. That was fine, she couldn't wrap her head around fiddly engineering either. So she had left the growing arguments of her other sisters behind her. They could sort it out on their own, pretended to not notice the eldars stalking her from the rooftops. They were probably just making sure she wasn't doing anything mean in their territory, and followed in her sister's path. The only problem left was what was currently impeding her path forwards. 4 tech guards in robes. They'd been steadfastly delaying her for many minutes now. She pinched her brow for a moment before trying again. So I know my sister is currently inside. We can neither confirm or deny that. One of the tech guards spoke in a synthetic drone. And I know that there's some sort of big meeting going on right now. Confirmation. The Archmagi of Mars and Griffon are currently exchanging data. Please return at a later time. Another one, not the first one, spoke. And I know that she's not an Archmagi of Mars or Girfon, so she's not required to attend this meeting, which means that she was allowed in despite not being initially called upon. We can neither confirm or deny that. The 3rd tech guard in a row spoke. So it should be fine for me to go in too, right? Negative. The Archmagi of Mars and Griffon are currently exchanging data. Please return at a later time. Finished by the last tech guard in a row. But I don't want to interrupt their discussion. I just want to talk to my sister, who is currently inside, which means I need to go in. Designation is Child of the Omnissiah. Your presence is an interruption to the talks by virtue of your nature. Allowing you in will disrupt the exchange of information. But you let my sister in. We can neither confirm or deny that. Why did you let my sister in? We could neither confirm or deny that we have done so. She is also a child of the Omnissiah, so wouldn't she also disrupt the talks? Isn't that hypocritical? The 4 tech guard looked at each other for a few moments. She almost felt elation at making progress. They turned back to her and dashed her hopes immediately. It is not our place to question that. She leapt on the weakness, pointing a dramatic finger at the 4 figures she towered over. So you did allow her in? There was a long pause. The tech guards shuffled nervously. Lofn narrowed her eyes at the 4. Let me in. Negative. The Archmagi of Mars and Griffon are currently exchanging data. Please return at a later time. Lofn wanted to scream. To Cassandra, Primarch of the 8th Legion, judgment had been passed, although she had little authority to enforce it further than she had. A frustration, but one ultimately of little outright concern. The situation had been de-escalated, future tensions dispelled, and the attitudes of her sisters accounted for. It was only a matter of time before Athena caused great offence, and unlike Lofen, Athena would never be willing to flex on the matter. Lofen had angered Petra, and had driven her away before that could occur. Lofen would apologize and attempt to make amends. No permanent harm to the relations done. Roboute would be pleased that Cassandra was smoothing relations while he was away. She would not need to tell him openly. He was clever enough to realize when the matter was recounted to him. Their father had arrived. Cassandra refused to look at what his death might be. Instead, she busied herself with the next week and the path she wanted to nudge the future along on. It was not guaranteed, of course, but the little details mattered little at the moment. Consistently, something on the flagship above threw off her sight. Constant shifting in ways that she could not predict, seemingly for little reason. It took some time to find the reason why. There was another brother on the ship, one that foresaw the things to come in a manner completely different from the sight of the eldar, in a manner she could not directly interact with. She would need to gain more information before approaching. In the meantime, she had some individuals to approach, namely those that shared her, Geneline, adopted children created from the remnants of the primordial stuff that went into making herself, the ones Roboute had told them about. The 8th Legion was in the field, not quite socializing but present in accordance with diplomatic exchanges, half of all of them that were currently alive. There was an irregular number in the field, indicating battlefield losses or some other circumstances that she was not quite aware of. She let her vision walk a half-hour ahead of herself, questioning her Legion Master on all manner of subjects in the vision to come. She was told much, and much of it hardly mattered. They were recruited from the children of Terran prisoners, among darkness and death and suffering. They were pale and unused to bright light. They were prone to any number of unprofessional habits, and utterly loyal to the one that had raised them up. They had suffered 12% losses against warp forces on the planet Barbarous, and had yet to recover in full. They were predominantly used to sabotage and terror tactics, and unused to direct combat in a pitched warfront. They painted their armor pitch black, and forewent any heraldry save a bright white number, VIs, on their pauldron. Their last major campaign was the complete extermination of the Saragorn enclave on Terra, who had ignored the Emperor's ban on cybreeding experimentation. They were crude and grim, and indulged in drink and smoke and betting. They were rough in training and demeanor. They weren't particularly pleasant to look upon. The only thing that actually mattered was that they were the 8th Legion. They were hers. She was content with that. She marched onto the fields outside of Baston, dressed in the form-fitting wear of the eldar. She ignored the looks being given unto her by all others, and continued her pace past the warriors in gold, past the first 7 legions, and down to the 8th in a line. The trip took her nearly an hour, all in all, to get from the training grounds in the castle down to them on foot. She was in no rush. That simply gave her more time to question. Finally, she stood before the collection of men in black-clad power armor, and sat in a manner more casual than most of their surrounding fellows. Small tables of cards and dice had been brought with them, and the air above their heads was filled with smoke and the scent of cheap drink. They were silent as she approached, glaring to disguise their own hidden fears at the superhuman that now stood before their field section of tables. Straining her material eyes would not allow her to see their end, but she had already mapped out their limits in a future that was not required anymore. There were roughly 44,000 present, 4 to a table, and 4 that sat around, said tables, waiting for their own turns. They had ignored and refused the offer of the long eldar benches, and instead relied on crude platforms they had brought with them, each one covered in scratches and graffiti, indicating years of use and abuse. Their plates were filled by contraband and polluting elements. Their bets were over rations and drinks. This was not required of them. They were simply used to doing so from their childhood recall. One among them stood up. The only mark that he was a leader among his fellows was the painted-on markings on his chest and back, and the bright red scrap of cloth tied around the head and arm of his armor. He squinted from underneath his raised visor and shifted the thick smoke stick to the other side of his mouth as he approached her. He was fearful of her. He was disguising this for the sake of morale. It was more than good enough. You stand before the 8th Legion." He spoke behind smoke and a scarred face, lips and chin covered by a layer of stubble and brow covered in ink-marked text. He was having trouble seeing her in the bright light around them, green eyes narrowed in focus. His Terran was crude and imprecise. "Chief Killers, in service of the Lord Emperor. I am Legion Master Rayner. What business do you have with us?" She looked down at him, cast her gaze over the assembled Space Marines once more, then back down at the man. "I am the 8th Primarch." There was no other introduction required for them to understand what that meant. There was silence at that, all present before her suddenly understanding why her appearance had such an effect on them. Few, if any, dared to move, and the Legion Master was frozen for a long moment. To dispel the tension, she raised the bottle she was carrying. Exodite, ambrosia. "I bring drink." Her Legion Master shifted the cigar in his mouth again, taking a drag and then exhaling smoke without needing to lift his hand in a practiced motion. After a long moment, he replied with a glint of relief behind the wall of a strong facade. "It's about damn time." She let her lips twitch upwards to express amusement. It was an expression she had practiced in the mirror for many hours. Judging from the wave of dispelled tension, she had gotten it right this time. She moved forwards and began to speak to her legion. They told her that this city took 6 years to build and was not yet done. Upon arrival and subsequent ritual conquest, the High King commissioned a brand new capital at a suitable location to serve as a center of power and industry, expanding outwards as needed, but primarily to absorb populations from smaller villages and towns, so that they can be demolished and rebuilt from the ground up once more. The location chosen was a nearby mountain, the top of which was promptly carved away to raise a gleaming white citadel, underneath which tunnels were dug into the mountain itself to house many of the most critical elements of infrastructure within the bulwark of the protective rock. The factory cities of Chemos were constructed similarly, massive mountains of living spaces and industrial machines, constantly churning and always on the brink of utterly failing. The good scholars of her father told her such urban planning was called a hive cities. They resembled the fortress capital she stood within, in the same way a normal woman resembled her or one of her sisters. She had been allowed to bother the architects over the week, troubling them with all manner of investigations into the design and planning of the world wrought by her apparent brother's hands. She had been expecting something similar to Chemos, that this city was erected over the course of decades of slow and steady expansion. 6 years. The first year to shave away the peaks, drill out the tunnels, and raise the walls of a keep that towered over all other landscapes. The second year to begin construction on the most critical elements of infrastructure therein. A massive central reactor deep in the earth, water treatment and sewer networks, electrical networks and maintenance tunnels. While the inside was being carved out, the outer mountain was being shaved down into terraces, and upon those terraces brightly lit apartment complexes, military checkpoints, roadways, and more carved their way on the outermost face of the mountain. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th year to continue this great work. Upon reaching the 5th year, the record said that the mountain had been carved down in the prescribed manner down to the surrounding foothills. At this point, the construction began to spread outwards. Yet more tunneling followed, and railways established under the earth alongside roads for foot and cart travel above. It was the 6th year, and she was standing in a city with superior initial design to anything she had seen on Chemos. They were beginning to establish the farmlands, walls, and garrisons that would surround the city. The defences of the city were being rapidly constructed to contest potential void bombardment, and the development of the surrounding landscapes was still not yet done. Even now, in the far distance from the terraces, beyond the collected numbers of custodes, astartes, and auxilia, she could see the construction continue on, swarming numbers of workers and vehicles, constantly at work in all manner of digging, foundation laying, rail laying, ploughing, and more. Beautiful, efficient, well-planned, comfortable for its inhabitants, defensive, and more. The more she looked into the development, the more praise she could find for it. She very much desired to meet this brother of hers, the one that designed this city. Most of her sisters did not care for her fascination with this business. Hathor was polite, but unable to truly engage. Loffen wasn't intending any offence, but was blunt with her dismissal. Athena had given a half-interested glance, but quickly returned to other topics. Her new sisters were little better for the most part. Cassandra was good at listening, but had little to contribute. Morrigan simply nodded along, all of this being well within reason for her. Petra had shown the most engagement, eagerly boasting about the efforts of their older brother, and for that Fulgrim was quite happy to chatter away, but she was also quite distracted, with something else clearly on mind. She contented herself that at least Danu would share her fascination, although she would be more focused on practicalities of the design as opposed to more intangible benefits. Madonna would only wish to hear about how grandiose the construction was, and Atalanta would look at it only so she could try to defeat it in her head. She was exceptionally cute that way. Marvelling at something that few, if any of her sisters shared a passion for, was quite a lonely feeling. What was worse was how often she was accidentally ignored by their argumentation and boisterous shouting. They were going to see a theatre tonight. The Exodites had arranged for it to play, hiring a troupe of performers of their kind. She had asked what events were being held for the diplomatic exchanges, and a long list was provided for her by a local administrator of such affairs. So long as she brought her guardians with her, it was more than permissible. Well, she was going to see a theatre tonight. She wasn't sure how many of her sisters would actually accept her invitation, or how many of them heard her last time she asked. She wished she could stand out more. It was quite disheartening to be overlooked so often. Staring at herself in the mirror, fine dress in Terran fashions, a half-armour, half-frilly thing that bore a great many tassels and tapers, hugging her form and hair done to her most exacting standards, with the ideal ratios of cosmetics applied to highlight her face, she grunted in a most unladylike fashion, and once more cursed her very unfortunate name. Waterbringer sounded well and good, but Fulgrim just wasn't an appealing name. It sounded like the name of a cursed sword or evil sorcerer. She was going to go complain to Ma and Pa again when she returned to the ship. They were probably going to chuckle at her over it, and she wouldn't have the heart to be actually mad. Standing, she moved to the entrance of the chamber that had been provided for her for the duration of her stay. One of 20 great rooms in a wing of the primary keep. She was canny enough to realize they had been designed with her and her sisters in mind, each door more than spacious enough to fit them, and the rooms inside scaled for their greater heights. Exiting, she was greeted by the diligent presence of the 5 of her legion, currently acting as her guardians. She had requested such specifically. Her legion master, Thrallus, has elected 5 to act as her honor guard during her stay. A temporary formation for the moment. Flavius, Thestis, Gaius, Etiad, and Rylanor. 3 veterans, an established standard-bearer, and a foremost instructor to serve as her first praetorians. She was more than pleased with them, from her assessment of their character thus far. She was further pleased to see that they were clad in the ceremonial cloaks for non-active war zones such as this, that took some convincing on her part. Smiling in greeting, she proceeded onwards down the hall, doing her best to ignore the disappointment from seeing empty room after empty room as she passed. "I'm thinking of calling you my Phoenix Guard. What are your thoughts on that?" she asked her praetorians. There were a few moments of humming and shifting heads, that and the steady sounds of armoured boots stepping in unison across flooring of a peculiar bone-white material. "It has potential," Thestis spoke, nodding his head. "There are concerns to address beforehand, though," Flavius added. "Your caretakers informed us your name meant Waterbringer. Phoenixes are typically associated with fire." "Ah, but fire brings rain afterwards, remember," Gaius spoke, only to be met with an immediate counter. "What?" "No, it doesn't. It doesn't." "Gaius, where did you hear that?" Etiad responded with a baffled frown. "Perhaps he meant fire brings pain." Thestis dryly added, "Well, fire makes smoke, right?" Gaius started to defend himself. "Right." Etiad demonstrated that he was listening. "Well, smoke rises up and fills the air. Way I figure, there's only so much space in the atmosphere, and hot air rises. So the smoke fills up the top layers and pushes all the clouds down, making them fall as rain after." Gaius finished his line of thought. There was silence for a long moment. "Gaius, Were you recruited before or after basic education? Flavius asked in genuine concern. I'm not ignorant. I checked the old weather reports back on Terra. Every wildfire of note was followed by intense rainfall in the region after a few hours, smothering the flames shortly after. Gaius defended himself further. It's a consistent pattern. It goes back centuries from what I could find. And if we go to check, these reports will still be there, I'm certain. Thestis added, sounding like he didn't believe that for a moment. Yes, Gaius responded hotly. This was met with further mostly good-natured argumentation from the rest of those following her. They continued marching for some time, arguing in that manner until Rylanor spoke up. I think Phoenix Guard is quite the fine name, Lady Fulgrim. Thank you, Rylanor, she responded with a bright smile. Rounding the corner, she was surprised and delighted to see one of her sisters standing at the entranceway. Leaned up against the side of the entrance leading out from the fortress, her sister Morrigan stood in a long white and green dress, arms crossed and staring blankly from behind locks of shock white. White was a hair colour many of her sisters shared, now that she thought on the matter. Cracking open a hawkish amber eye, Morrigan pushed off from the side of the entrance to greet her. Ready then? Morrigan. Fulgrim responded happily, her guards immediately straightening into professional and silent lockstep. I was afraid none had heard me. Are you joining me then? Morrigan nodded and looked off to the entrance as she responded. I learned to pay attention to details. She spoke no further, and Fulgrim sensed that there was a story behind that statement. More importantly, though, she was frustrated that her invitation was, perhaps accurately, described as a detail. She quite desired that it would be more important than just a detail in a wider scene. She supposed she was happy at least one of her sisters was coming with her to the theatre. It was far better than none of them coming with her. I kneel upon this red-soaped soil, the man Eldar sang out in slightly accented terror in the midst of the massive Colosseum. Clad in an elaborate costume designed to look like ancient Eldar wear, and wearing a mask that shifted between forms in accordance with the intended emotional state of the character he was playing. All around the Colosseum was filled with attendees, many of which were from the Imperial armies, and psychic projectors of some variation ensured that all of them heard the performance clearly. Around the Eldar man, several other Eldar sang in soft, haunting tones, dressed in pure white dresses and clothes, stained in several places with blood red. They played the parts of ghosts in the performance. The central character continued in his slow, mournful tune. A life of pain, a life of toil, the theatre was apparently specialized in retellings of significant events in Eldar history, something that Fulgrim admitted to being somewhat curious about. The current performance was about the start of the War of Northern Aether. The central character to this prelude was a king, returning to find his planet razed and raided. All now ash. All now gone. Death revealed under rising dawn. The actor stood slowly, bringing up his hands to look despondently upon, the mask expressing tremendous grief visible even from great distances. She was told that they were called something particular in Eldar, but the wandering performance troupes were servants and followers of their trickster god. Harlequins, their name apparently best translated to, in Terran, warrior. Actors who acted out ancient stories and legends of the Eldar in wandering theatre groups. She was quite enthralled thus far. The performance was excellent, and she had never seen something like it on Chemos. Celebrations were, at best, extra hours to rest or another ration distributed out on that long, weary world. Am I to blame? Is this my shame? The actor looks about the scene in despair, but then stops as he notices a scrap of banner on the battlefield. Moving over to pick it up, he stares at it for a long moment. The haunting chorus around him begins to shift into a more dramatic, dark tone as the mask shifts to express rising fury overtaking sorrow. Nay, nay, the actor speaks, slowly as he comprehends the banner he holds. Nay, he speaks with greater energy now. I have their scent. I know their name. Fury sets my blood aflame. The actor waves one hand now, up and towards a theatre banner with the image of a constellation she was unfamiliar with. Those bastard stars. I must repay, for these scars, for this day. Thrusting his hand up directly above, the actor bellows out the next lines powerfully, accented by the furious chorus. Hear me now, on. Pain and blood, my wraith will fall on them as a flawed. I will not stall, I will not fall. Come to me, warriors all, I will lay lather the heathen halls. The actor commands furiously, as other actors in costumes that appear as tattered armor and bloody banners begin to arrive from their battered places about the war zone. In one final roaring declaration, the actor finishes his part of the song. On my name, Mal, Wyren. The line is carried for several seconds, demonstrating the immense lungs and masterful vocals of the actor. Finally, the actor takes the banner above his head and shakes it furiously, drawing his sword and holding it above his head as if to run the banner through. Their gods will burn. The actor finished his song with a howling fury. The chanting about him from the ghosts was now warlike, and came in bursts of drum roll. The steps of the wounded warriors approaching were in lockstep, forming an underlying rhythm to the whole of the song's ending. Fulgrim found that she quite enjoyed theatre. Thinking on the matter further, she was rather confident Madonna would enjoy it as well. Fulgrim wasn't sure if any of her sisters had ever been to something like this before. The scene entered intermission, the lights around dimming as the actors began to quickly set up the next set for the long-form story. Phoenix Guard. Phoenix Guard. Fulgrim whispered off to her side and behind her, noticing but ignoring Morrigan's slightly amused glance. I'm thinking of having the 3rd Legion practice theatre. What are your thoughts on that? After a moment, they began to whisper back. It has potential. Thestis spoke first, as was almost tradition among the 5 at this point. Rapidly, they entered a brief period of discursive chatter as the intermission went on. I'm sure Aurelia would be glad to join. Morrigan spoke in that same dry but not cruel manner, voice naturally lending itself to emotionless witticisms. She's quite enthralled by old Malwen stories. Fulgrim blinked at that. How many more stories are about this eldar? About? Morrigan questioned for a moment before realizing something and chuckling in amusement. Reaching over, she pointed at one of the towering war walkers of the eldar in the distance. Gigantic, thin constructs of bone and clad in massive hide cloaks, they looked to be Xenonites in rough proportion and frame, hands resting on gargantuan curved swords in a stoic manner. I meant stories old Malwen tells. Fulgrim spoke in no small excitement. Ah, you mean he still lives? She was told this story was set quite a long time ago. She didn't know how long Eldar lived. Ah, no. Morrigan corrected, voice filled with amusement from a joke that Fulgrim wasn't yet privy to. Old Malwen died long ago. Eldar don't use machine intelligences to direct their war machines, they use ghosts. Fulgrim paused for a moment, as did her Phoenix Guard, and a realization began to settle over them. Morrigan continued idly. Old Malwen animates the largest of those constructs over there. He would happily tell these long-winded stories that didn't usually go anywhere whenever we asked. Cassandra and Petra always fell asleep. Aurelia lapped up every moment. Is he in pain? That's necromancy, isn't it? Fulgrim asked with unease, settling over her. The Eldar are necromancers. Morrigan paused, a dark look passing over her eyes. No, it most definitely isn't. Necromancy defiles and taints all it touches. Eldar capture souls to prevent them from being devoured. Morrigan sounded absolute in that statement, a furious, unsettled pain behind it. Fulgrim did not wish to start yet another conflict, so instead she inquired. Prevent them from being devoured? Morrigan paused, nodding her head from side to side. I suppose you wouldn't know, would you? I'll explain after the show if you wish. Please. Fulgrim responded with a grateful smile and nod. Morrigan chewed the inside of her cheek for a moment, glaring at nothing, before shaking her head and continuing. For now, know that Malwen isn't in any kind of pain. He's just a sleepy old man that loses track of where he was going with a tail most of the time. Morrigan returned to the initial question. I'll see if I can arrange a conversation with him if you wish. Ah, that would be lovely. She was still rather certain that capturing souls was the work of a necromantic power by definition. Father's sorceress lessons were boring but thorough on such matters.